The story that I'm going to be looking at today is called In Remembrance by Dan Abnett. This story is a sci-fi story told from the perspective of an artist, Jesua Thoreau, who was commissioned to create a sculpture celebrating the victory at the city of Vervenhive, with a particular focus on the Tanith, a regiment of soldiers who fought in the siege. He follows them through a single day, attempting to capture their spirit and nobility as he does so, and facing many challenges along the way. The reason that I enjoy this story so much is the nature of both the perspective that the story is told from and the point of time that it's set in. Unlike many of the stories written in a wartime setting, the story is told from the perspective of a civilian, an artist that wasn't even present for the fighting. He is an outsider to the conflict, who has led a sheltered life far from danger. Like many civilians, he has a heavily romanticized view of war, assuming it is a heroic thing where heroes achieve glory through martial prowess, and is completely unaware of the true nature of war. The author does an excellent job of showing the naivety of him through the story. From his shock at the destruction that the siege has wrought on the city when he enters it, to his reaction to being in a firefight. That last scene in particular is the perfect example of his lack of understanding about the realities of war. He is used to a particular sound being associated with guns, for example, due to all the propaganda videos. Usually they sound big, loud, and important. And so when the combat is actually occurring around him, he is unaware completely of what's going on because the weapons sound completely different, really unimportant, like sticks cracking, as is described in the book. The time point that it is set in also differentiates it from the majority of wartime stories, as it is set in the immediate aftermath of the war. It focuses on the cleanup, the recovery. We get to see the starving survivors, the swarms of orphaned children, the injured and the dead. The story, while containing some action in it, does not depend on it to keep the reader engrossed in the story. Instead, it depends on the characters within it, and their actions and interactions allow us as readers to be sucked into the story. The story also does an excellent job of showing the brutality of war. There is a particular scene where the narrator is walking through some streets and realizes that the porcelain shards that he thought he was walking on were actually fragments of bone. He only notices this because one of the bone shards still has the eye socket attached. Later, during the small skirmish that occurs, he sees a man killed for the first time and does not initially realize what is happening. He thinks the soldier is messing around, being stupid, until he sees the hole drilled into his skull by an enemy shot. This shakes the narrator to the core, as would any of us who've never seen such instant death before, and he goes into shock, which Dan Abnett accurately portrays for the rest of the story. The story itself is written in first person. However, the way that it is written lends itself more towards a personal diary for the narrator, or an oral telling of the story by the narrator, similar to campsite stories and that sort of thing, as opposed to the whole story occurring within the moment as many first-person stories are. The start of the story clarifies that it is being told 60 years from the events of when the story is occurring. This allows the author to make you the listener in a tale, and still have you relate and empathize with the key characters. Probably the biggest issue the story faces is the heavy reliance on presupposed knowledge of the world and that the author assumes the reader has. While the story does fill out the world for the reader to some extent, if you have read the other books in the series, you can understand and have a greater appreciation and affection for the characters and the world that the story is set in. As a snapshot of the key characters of the wider series, however, it does an excellent job of portraying them accurately, often hinting at conflicts that the wider story that the narrator in this particular story has no knowledge of, but they're suggested through snippets of dialogue and the actions of key characters. As a fan of the series, I really enjoyed the story, as it filled in some of the gaps that had been left in the wider series. The change in perspective also made for a really nice change from the usual third-person subjective style that Dan Abnett usually used for his stories. While this piece does depend a bit too heavily on on the content of the rest of the series to be so that it's no longer easy for newcomers to access. It is an excellent piece that really shows Dan Abnett's ability to portray a warlike setting accurately and to portray civilians' experiences of it. Thank you.